All right, we are at the top of the hour, so I would love to get started today with our fifth installment in the Classroom Management Mastery series, Engaging in Civil Discourse. Before we dive into all the content we have today, I want to do just a quick announcement about some of the upcoming events and news that we have coming up from the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and some of our partners that we work with here at Ashford. On Wednesday, July 15th, coming up, we have a presentation from the AU Library on the Association for Computing Machinery Database. That's coming up quickly tomorrow. And then we'll actually have another session of the Classroom Management Mastery series here at the end of this month, which is coming up soon. We usually have a month between, but we have some really exciting news that we'll share then about some new technology that we'll have available in our classrooms about predicting student success, which we're really excited to share. So later this month, we'll get together for that. And then please put on your calendars, August 3rd through 5th, we're going to have the AU Early Childhood Education virtual conference will be taking place. So please save room for that coming up. But really, I just wanted to, give a quick presentation, quick introduction to our speakers today. The presentation you're going to see today is based largely on the document you see here, called Engaging in Civil Discourse in the Classroom, which was recently created to help faculty navigate some potentially sensitive conversations that are taking place in our classrooms. A lot of times, in this Classroom Management Mastery series, we like to focus on efficiencies in the classroom or new technology. But today we want to take some time to focus on what we're seeing in the world and then the world that we see reflected in our online classrooms as well. To be honest, I was wondering if it really actually made sense to hold our webinar today the same day as the initial Turn the Tide event this morning, but I actually think it scaffolds perfectly now. I think it makes perfect sense. The panel this morning did an amazing job of, I think, lighting a fire in the culture of our university, and I really look forward to continuing that conversation. And I'm confident, that our presentation today will give some tangible ways, I think that we can all teach and lead with a lot of those ideas and principles in mind in our classrooms. It's just, we've had so many conversations lately. It's almost, what our role is in this world and as educators, and, if we can't lead a meaningful and civil conversation about and, around the things that are happening in our world and in our online classroom, I feel like we're doing our students a disservice. At the same time, we realize and acknowledge the fact that the pressure to be able to facilitate something like that as a faculty member can feel daunting, for sure. So we are very fortunate today to have a panel of experienced and very passionate educators to talk us through some of these approaches to lead our classes and exactly these types of conversations that we're having. Before we turn things over to our main presenters today, I also wanted to just mention a really big thank you to someone who you don't see mentioned in our presenter list here. I did just want to thank Dr. Teresa Kura quickly for, bringing all of us together today. And she was really instrumental in just bringing a lot of these individuals here together for this conversation that, I think is going to be really meaningful. So with that, I really want to turn things over to and give most of our time today to our panel, Dr. Avisha Setaginejad, Dr. Stephanie Anderson, Dr. Yolanda Harper, Dr. Tomika Fitzpatrick, and Dr. Yvonne Lozano.
Okay, thank you very much, Cole. So just before I start, I want to apologize if I look to my left, your right, because I have another screen here and I see the presentation, in a larger format here. So I apologize if I don't look at the camera directly. But let's start. How many of you remember this dress? Unfortunately, I can't see hands, but I'm sure the majority of our participants may remember this dress. This is a photograph that became viral in February of 2015. But what was the story behind this dress? There was a wedding party in England, and The bride's mom took a photo of this dress in a mall and sent it to her daughter so that her daughters can see her dress. But when the daughter showed the photo of the dress to the family members, there was a discussion over the color of the dress. Some people were seeing it as black and blue, and some people were seeing it as white and gold. So she posted the photo on her Facebook page to ask her friends what they see. And then the photo found its way to Tumblr, where it really became crazingly viral. So from Tumblr to Facebook to Twitter to other shareable social media, people started to share because everybody had this experience as the family had. Some people see it in black and blue, and somebody will see it in white and gold. And not only ordinary people started to talk about this issue of the dress, but also politicians, government agencies, celebrities, and even well-known companies and brands started to talk, what is this color disruption about? So let me show you a couple of examples. This was posted by Department of Police that says, okay, let's have a peaceful conversation, agree to disagree. The Joshua Tree National Park used this debate to promote its gray and green ranger uniform. The Senator Chris Murphy says, I know three things. I know the ACA, the Affordable Care Act works. I know there is climate change, and I know that the dress is gold and white. Justin Bieber said, I see it in blue and black. Some companies like Cirque du Soleil and IKEA use the debate to just promote their brand colors. Like they said, okay, we see it in blue and yellow. And Sephora says, okay, let's put all the debate aside. We can have all the photos. So there was, many use of this debate, but apparently it was really, really big in the among the people. And ultimately, the dress got 4.4 million tweets within 24 hours and 37 million views in a few days, which these numbers are really, really big for a viral phenomena in the field of marketing. And Roman Original, which was the retailer of this dress at the mall, confirmed that the dress is blue and black. And because of this debate, they had an amazingly increase in their sale. But as a nice act, they also created one version of white and gold for a charity purpose after all this conversation online. But let's see, what was the problem? People perceive color in many different ways, and when people found out that the others won't see the colors that they see, it was very strange and awkward for them. And that's why they started to label the other parties as ignorant or colorblind or malicious or crazy, because they couldn't understand how come you don't see it in blue and black, or how come you don't see it in black and white. And there were also other colors that some people would see, in that photo. So the world was kind of dividing up between two groups, just fighting over the color of the dress. And in a study among 1,400 people, because the researchers started to look at the phenomena, what is going on, why we see it differently. So they surveyed 1,400 people, and 57% they said they see it in black and blue. 30% was seeing it in gold and white, and there were some other variations of the colors. But what they found out is that perceiving color in our mind does not happen in isolation. Our mind also adds lighting inputs to recognize the color. And more interestingly, our perception of lighting is different from each other at the same time looking at the same picture. So people whose mind perceive the image under natural light, they will see the dress in black and gold. And people whose mind perceive the image to be taken under a blue, a yellow light will see the dress in black and blue. And there was another interesting research that found out that this lighting concept is also common among early risers and night owls. So the majority of people who saw gold and white, the dress as gold and white, were early risers because of this perception of lighting they had. And the majority who saw it as black and blue were night owls. So right now that we learned our perception is different from each other, and this difference is involuntary, how we can as educators help our students to think and to discuss. Stephanie, floor is yours. Stephanie, I think you're on my mute.
Thank you so much. Can you jump ahead one slide? Thank you. The example of the dress really illustrates the many different perspectives present in any conversation. As instructors, while we certainly do convey content knowledge to our students, an overarching aim of our time in the classroom is to teach them a skill, to teach them how to think and how to discuss, not what to think or say. I often tell my students I can learn as much from them as the other way around, and I believe that's true, but only when I commit to listening without the goal of changing minds before hearing what is even said. Expanding our own thinking requires practice. It's an intentional process. While we work to identify and avoid bullying discourse, modeling civil dialogue, we can achieve our goal of sharpening and refining students' thinking. This begins with an understanding of our own susceptibility toward bias. As educators, we encourage our students to think objectively, but we must recognize that we are not neutral either. So the first bullet point in the civil discourse infographic we're considering today urges us to avoid taking issue with a student rather than their argument, embracing the point they're currently trying to make regardless of their past attitude or performance. Next slide. I suspect none of us in the room today would identify as a bully, but consider the following quote. A bully believes that dissent from his or her opinions is evidence of either stupidity, perhaps even mental illness, or malice, bigotry. Jump ahead to the next slide. When a student expresses a view contrary to one's own, what is our initial reaction? What about a student who submits plagiarized or poor quality work? While we strive to maintain objectivity as instructors, our attributions or our explanations for behavior, along with any pre-existing biases we may hold, can influence our interactions. Next slide. Consider correspondence bias. So in this cartoon, Linus asks Lucy, "Why are you always so anxious to criticize me?" To which she responds, "I just think I have a knack for seeing other people's faults." Linus replies, "What about your own faults?" Lucy matter-of-factly states, "I have a knack for overlooking them." We find causes where we look for them. When judging other people's behavior, we focus on the person and attribute their actions to internal dispositional factors. A student submits late work. Maybe that student doesn't really care about school or is lazy. It's something about the student, a character flaw. When judging our own behavior, we can see all the contextual variables that are involved. We have access to so much more information, so our focus is on the circumstances. We're thus more likely to make situational attributions. I'm late submitting my grades. It was a holiday weekend. The internet was down. My daughter was sick. The tendency to overestimate dispositional factors and corresponding discounting of the situation when making attributions for others' behavior comes so naturally to us that it's been dubbed the fundamental attribution error. It underlies so many of our judgments and the resulting actions we take, including how we treat other people. Is it possible that our emotional reactions to a student's behavior or attitude might influence our response? Absolutely. For example, more than one time when confronted by what I perceive to be an angry student, I've typed a hurried response and then set it aside for a while, realizing that my initial reaction did not take into consideration other possible explanations for the intonation I read into the message. Next slide. There are other biases that impact how we approach the conversation. We might choose to seek or present only information that supports our own point of view, discounting the argument made by the student because we assume ourselves more knowledgeable or the student just plain wrong. Any of these errors will lead us to overlook the student's point of view and miss an opportunity to engage in civil discourse, to discuss an issue by presenting evidence and appealing to reason. Robert George says, "A critic permits you to make your case in the terms you believe appropriate and doesn't try to win arguments by dictating the language of the discussion in ways that beg the question. A bully does precisely the opposite." We must be willing to give our students an opportunity to challenge us, to express their views and make a case in the best way they know how, scaffolding them and realizing it may take some time for them to learn this skill. Next slide. Above all, we must remain mindful that our goal is not to win an argument. We want to model intellectual, civil discourse. In the remainder of this session, my colleagues will present practical strategies you can employ in your classroom starting today to set the stage for civil discourse by creating non-threatening discussion spaces, strategies for modeling productive engagement in a discussion and overcoming our own biases in the process, and tips for following up with students as necessary.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for that wonderful segue into the next portion of our session today. As we think about setting the stage for civil discourse, let's look at a key organizational question. How do you ask probing questions in a manner that doesn't feel like an attack or that we're invalidating the student's worldview? Well, it just so happens that promoting critical thinking appears in our institutional, our program, and our course outcomes in a variety of different ways. And while this is not the only framework that can be used to conceptualize the role of questioning in promoting civil discourse, it's one that I find useful, and certainly, time doesn't permit to do a deep dive into the model. But as we move through the remainder of our presentation, including the examples Dr. Lozano will share, I hope that you will reflect on how this model applies and how we can promote and restore civil discourse in our classrooms by applying critical thinking principles. Okay, next slide. So when considering how to respond to a student who makes a comment that could be construed as an invitation to uncivil discourse, it can be helpful to reflect on the context. Where did the comment occur? Was it in the discussion forum? Was it on Wednesday? So they were at the top of the discussion forum where everyone potentially has the opportunity to see the post, or was it at 2:30, literally a.m. going into day 8, where probably no one but you and the student will see the post? Was it replied to a classmate, or was it an isolated comment in their initial post? Was it in an assignment where only you and the student will see it? And then even the type of assignment might dictate how we reply, or if we reply. Is it a formal written assignment where the student went way off onto a tangent because maybe something going on in his personal life? They just used the assignment to express what they were feeling? Or was it a journal assignment that has, is a little more lenient, and so they interpreted that as like a journal or blog where they can share anything they want to share? And then, another place it might have occurred would be in a private email. Even then, were they just expressing their personal opinion, or were they expressing concern about what a student said or what the instructor communicated? So all of these can impact how we choose to respond, or if we choose to respond. So we've decided that we need to respond. We'll assume we have. Now what? So the next portion of this presentation is primarily about facilitating understanding, which is a high priority goal in civil discourse. We or our students may have the most beautiful or important message to share, from our perspectives, of course, but if the potential recipient is not receptive, it's like the proverbial tree falling in the forest with no one to hear that it's fallen, at its most benign, and potentially kindling for a very uncivil blow up at the worst. Okay, next one. So this is about increasing receptivity. What can we do to prepare the stage for receptivity before we begin the official intervention once we see the student's comment? Do we clearly understand what the student was intending to communicate? Or have we and other students in the class made an assumption, jumped ahead? So I like to start with just making the assumption that the student's intentions were positive at best or at least benign. Even if there might have been a little bit of intentional provoke there, this puts me in the right mindset to be able to respond in a way that's about facilitating civil discourse. And so that leads to doing a self-check. You know, were my buttons pushed? Can I see from other students' comments that their buttons were pushed? Or does the student's post itself indicate that his buttons were pushed by something else that happened in the class, in the reading, in the videos, or outside the class? So self-checking is important. And for an example, I was asked to review a set of communications between a student and an instructor. And kind of the first communication that I saw in the stream, the student was attempting to get clarification on instructions. It was clear from the instructor's response that she or he could not understand why the student didn't understand the instructions, and asserted that the instructions were very clear and accurate, invalidating the student's perspective right there. And at one point said, other students understand them just fine. So pushing a very hot button for this particular student, who later in the conversation stream identified herself or himself as a very high, quote unquote, honors student. So, you know, saying that other students understood just fine, pushed buttons for that student. And then there were a series of comments going back and forth from that point of mutual button pushing going, that ultimately led to a very inappropriate behavior on the student's part that could have been pushed up to a student conduct issue that might have been handled differently. You know, hindsight's 20/20, but that's why we're here, to share our stories and our perceptions. So in responding, whether the student's complaining, no matter what they're saying, I look for something that I can genuinely praise. Good question. Thank you for having the courage to be honest, to share your perspective. Double checking that our own language is as non-threatening as we can humanly make it. Dr. Anderson made a good point of sometimes setting our response to the side for a bit can be helpful. Being transparent. I'm not just disagreeing with you. Remember, my role here is to challenge all of us to think about things from different perspectives. Using emojis appropriately can soften the message, but we don't want to overuse them to the point that we're not taken seriously. Setting appropriate limits and boundaries, taking time, I mentioned earlier. And if feelings are highly negative or polarized, you know, model, you know, it's okay to take time. I need to do some more research. I'll get back with you. We can take this off the slide. Okay, next one. So how do you begin seeking to understand the student's worldview? You know, so from the example I gave earlier, you could have asked, well, which part of the instructions did you not understand? If they look super clear to you and you can't imagine why no one could not understand them. But again, being thankful. I'm so glad you brought that to my attention. I'm sure others have found it unclear as well. So normalizing this, what the students are sharing with you. Now, actually, if we get only one shot, if I get only one shot to thinking the student might read a reply in a discussion forum, then I may often combine asking questions with sharing information. So we're talking here about asking questions, but there are times where you want to share some information as well. And so I may combine them, especially if the student has posted a little bit and they probably are only going to tune in one more time when they have to respond to their peers and to their instructor, then I may do a combination of both question and sharing information. An example here, a student in 2020, you may use the word Oriental in a discussion post to refer to human beings. And so I just started out praising the student for the good content in his post, but I wanted to address that language early. So after the praise, you know, close to the top, I could share. Knowing how much you care about healing people who are hurting and how much you care about the community. I'm sure you didn't mean any harm at all when you used this particular word. And then I just shared a couple of links that were just more educational, not really any grandstanding, but just kind of FYI. And also shared that in 2016, the president signed a bill eliminating that word along with Negro, which I knew would be one that this particular student would appreciate being eliminated from federal laws. And also in 2017, the House passed the bill removing any reference to that term, as well as Negro and Spanish surname and Eskimo and Aleut from federal law. And then refocus back to the academic content, offering her an opportunity to share more of her expertise about the main topic at hand. But that way, if any other students saw the word being used in the post, and I happen to know that some other students already had different opinions about this particular student from other posts, so I just wanted to put it out there. And that gave the student an opportunity also to say, oh no, I didn't know, I didn't mean anything about it. So that also gave the student an opportunity to be perceived differently by her or his peers. Several times a year, I have students use the term homosexual in posts, and I approach it pretty much the same way. Okay, so now using the critical thinking standards. I won't go through all of these, but again, these are just reminders, and you will have access to our slides after. But the next two slides are just going to zip through quickly. When I see that there are challenges that may invite opportunities for uncivil discourse, usually clarity is a hot, precision, and sometimes breadth and logic and fairness are probably the ones I see most frequently. So here we have a few questions that are just examples that could be used, adapted into our own language, embellished upon to promote the understanding. Remember, we're using the questions at this point to promote understanding. Do I really understand what you're intending to communicate and maybe why you believe what you believe? Not to criticize it, but to understand it at this point. So clarity. So many times people think they're understood. Next slide, or next bullet point. Could you elaborate further? Give me an example, next bullet point. Now, how could we test that, or what evidence confirms this? Teaching a lot of courses in behavioral sciences, we're big on scholarly evidence to support one's point. So next. Could you be more specific, provide more details? Just keep going, yeah. So as you see, these are all examples. I will mention for breadth, I usually try, the student has already given one perspective, so I always ask for a minimum of 2 to 3 additional perspectives, because I don't like to just polarize like there's only 2 views in the world. I like to help them think as multidimensionally as possible. Okay, next one. And for this one, again, you'll have the resource. But when it comes to intellectual traits, this slide is a reminder of some of the key traits we are ideally modeling and helping students model in the classroom by the questions we ask and the information we share. And as you can imagine, integrity, fair-mindedness, humility, and empathy are often the most challenging to prompt once the discourse has already become uncivil. And at that point, it will take emails and maybe meeting with them to bring them back. So we want to not let it get to that point. Next slide. And if we remember that to seek understanding and hold everyone in the conversation accountable for their role in promoting understanding, then we're setting the stage for creating and restoring civil discourse. Do they feel they're being heard, or do they feel they're being silenced? Help us understand. Tell me more about what you had in mind when you wrote this. If you would, please tell me more. Well, I can see where you're coming from, etc. This is an interesting perspective. Tell us what evidence you use to base your conclusion on. If they say, well, I don't have any, I just personal experience, that's valid for our conversation. We may at some point prompt them to find additional evidence, but personal experience is valid. We don't want to invalidate it. We can then talk about what leads us to have certain personal experiences, as we talked about earlier in the beginning, even as something as basic as seeing a dress in a different manner. Next one. So questioning for solutions. There may be times when you get to a point in a conversation in which everyone has the best understanding humanly possible at the moment, and you discern that it's time to move to solutions. I almost never, ever write a solution, but if directly asked, I may refer to 2 or 3 articles or videos representing 3 different perspectives to a solution, and ask people what would they take from each of these different perspectives to create their own solution. But I might say, you've definitely identified a challenge. I know I've heard some others are also concerned about. Tell us what solutions you would recommend. So I like the solutions to come from the students whenever possible. Okay, next one. And then this slide is just a reminder that there are times that the potential for conversations becoming uncivil or just uncomfortable. Sometimes they're not uncivil. Students will just say, wow, that video was hard to watch because I had this experience. So it's not always an issue of civility or the lack thereof. But sometimes things that happen in the class are sparked by a discussion topic or some of the assigned readings or videos or media. This definitely we see happen in political science, sociology, psychology, criminal justice classes, as well as some others. And so often they may include topics that push buttons for some of our class participants. Or in those cases, you may want to post something like these signs that I made up, depending on what, at the top of the discussion board or at the top or in the instructor guidance before you add the video or whatever, or in the middle of a response to a student, just to let them know, this trigger warning, this is coming. There's one conversation where we talk about being culturally competent in the class, and in one particular week, we're talking about people who have different religious views. And so I share a scenario about a woman from a religious culture in which women are not allowed to even ask for a divorce, but her husband is physically abusive, engaging in extramarital affairs, threatens to take her kids if she leaves him, and asks, now how are you going to approach this in a culturally competent manner when everything we've been reading for the past 3.5 weeks is about respecting the beliefs of the individual's culture of origin, and just see what students do with it. And some say, well, I just can't put my views aside, and I drive her to the shelter myself, and it's just about being self-awareness. I don't say good, bad, or different. Thank you for your courage and your honesty. Self-awareness is very important. You may post a question that students have to think deeply about and confront their personal biases in order for students to actually answer the question in a scholarly manner. And again, in some cases, it may be a trigger for the student. So with that, last one, I think it's the last one, yeah. So my last topic is a reminder that there may be times that we decide to move the discussion out of the classroom. And has the student been making some progress, responding to prompts to think more critically, but now the week is over, and so you think it would be beneficial to carry it on, the conversation a little bit longer? Has a student emailed you offline to continue the conversation or asked to meet? I can say things like, well, if you like, I'd be happy to schedule a time for a follow-up conversation with you after we both have had time to review the literature and the research or the information or think more about it. And then if you do decide it's appropriate to take the conversation offline, we have a variety of methods, which is best. Often follow the student's lead, and your own comfort level would be my advice. Most of the time students will email or send a campus message. Occasionally a student might ask to meet. I haven't had that happen a lot, but you may have it depending on your class. You may have them say, can we meet and talk about this more? So if you know that you will be more effective if you have time to stop and think and before, then you might just want to offer one particular method versus another. If you're equally comfortable with all methods, you don't think anything's likely to blow up, then, again, balance what the student offers in your own comfort level. Email does have the advantage of providing written documentation of the communication, particularly if something is heated. Nowadays, we can record with Zoom, long as we tell people we're recording, or we can meet offline by Zoom or on phone or other video conferencing and just take notes afterwards if things don't go as positively as we thought. But we do have that opportunity to take it offline. And we do all have colleagues that we can bounce questions off and ideas on. What do you think about this? Ask the FSDA, the student support, and other colleagues. So with that, I've spoken more about using questions to understand what others are trying to communicate. Dr. Fitzpatrick will now share about seeking to understand their others' actual experiences.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. So we have heard basically how we would address civil discourse from a variety of educational backgrounds, marketing, all of those things. And so you'll hear a lot of themes. I'm looking at the chat when my eyes go this way. There's some really good things going on in the chat. And so in education, we tend to start with the why. We always want to figure out what is the theme? Why are we doing this, particularly in the College of Dale College. So one of the things that was mentioned was this power struggle. And we always, I think in terms of, we want to approach the necessity of civil discourse because we want to think about our students and we want to have our students in mind. And we want to help them understand that a part of civil discourse takes practice. It is not automatic. And so you'll see that I'm going to talk about this topic. Next slide, please. One of the things that I wanted to do, which you've seen a theme that's been carried through, is to provide an example, because sometimes if we're guilty of these things, we don't necessarily know that the selected verbiage is the first offense. And so you may see an example when you are looking at saying to someone, I don't think that's true because I have a different experience. It's like if you start the conversation with, that has never been my experience. What happens? The person probably is going to retreat a little bit and say, well, we don't have that commonality. If you say that's never happened to me, now I feel isolated. If you say you should have just, you're already giving me a solution before I've even shared with you what the problem is. Now, when we talk about power, a big thing to remember here is for our students, as Kim said in the chat, there's a power imbalance here, because even if we say I'm your friend, you can refer to me as Tamika, there is still, you are the holder of the pen. You are the person who is grading me. So we really want to be sure that we understand our own position. Is our job to give feedback on how our students express themselves, or is it on what they express? And so I think if we start with the why of, are we wanting to help them learn to express themselves better or express themselves in a way that we agree with, our response will be different. What is the potential interpretation? If we immediately kind of stop the conversation, it can be seen as dehumanizing. The student can feel like we're reducing or minimizing something about them. We're just diminishing their experience. But there's also this idea that when someone feels threatened and unable to defend themselves, and why might our students feel that they're unable to defend themselves? Because if we take the position that see it my way or don't express it, you can often make them think that they're going to be penalized if they see it any other way. And remember, once tempers flare, a lot of times there's no rational thinking taking place. So when we think of civil discourse is not ignoring issues, but your behavior will change or stop when you realize that your words or actions are hurting the other person. So it's not avoiding a disagreement, it's just being cognizant of how your actions or your words are impacting the student. It's bullying when the goal or the intent is to harm. or when you realize that the behavior is hurting someone and you continue that. I saw a lot going on in the chat that sometimes that anonymity will allow people to carry on a bullying behavior because they don't feel as accountable. But remember, certain dispositions or even phrases get unnaturally tainted just depending on who's introducing them. So a lot of times, you know, our verbiage is already weighted before it ever comes out of our mouths. Next slide, please. So, you know, if we have this issue of what we don't want to do, what do we want to do? And I'm not saying the selected examples are always the accurate way of addressing this, but, you know, I was thinking in terms of if someone said to me, I think what I hear you saying, it's kind of asking me for clarification or asking if you feel sad about my actions or something. But if you look at these things, the potential interpretation is just, number one, you're trying to ensure that you understand. And it goes back to what was said earlier, seeking to understand before seeking to be understood, and that you're listening before you're speaking. So what's the impact of that? Guess what? You could be fostering civil dialogue. You could be helping the other person develop their ideas and defend their position, and keeping the argument focused on substance. So there was a question in the chat, which I will not attempt to answer on my own. I think there's a lot of people in the chat who can help with that. But someone posted a question about, you know, a verbiage that could be, you know, offensive to other people, and how would you address that? And I think number one is remember to respect your role and your why. So if you're wanting to focus on what they're saying or how they're saying, let that drive you. And then remember that as instructors, our goal is to share information. We want to inform our students so that they can make decisions in their professional capacity. But we also want to be sure that we're helping and we're insightful in the way information is being interpreted. So we don't want to rush over disagreements. We do want to remember that disagreements are a normal part of life, but be sure that as we're approaching disagreements that we're not bringing along some baggage from a previous experience. So when we talked about, you know, certain verbiage is already kind of weighted, you know, if someone says something to you that maybe you've heard before and it didn't go over well, be sure that you're assessing what you're hearing in the here and now. Keeping in mind that, you know, you don't want your anger to be misdirected, but practice unconditional acceptance with our students. I think if we could say anything about civil discourse, it really is practicing unconditional acceptance with our students, meeting them where they are, letting them know that it is safe for them to be who they are. And it's safe for them to say what they're honestly thinking without the fear of being ridiculed or, you know, it being a hostile environment, or even that there's going to be some sort of harsh negativity associated with their future, you know, interactions with you. But hopefully you guys will all see the themes, regardless of what college you're in, that this is something that we could all practice. So I'm going to hand it back over to Avisha, and she will wrap us up.
Thank you so much. So a big part of civil discourse is critical thinking, the ability to think critically. And so right now I'm going to focus on this topic and also show you a few examples of how I teach that, and I help my students practice that in my courses, which are most of the time marketing courses or consumer behavior courses. Okay, so one of the strategies to practice critical thinking is to practice multiple perspective taking with the students, which means helping our students analyze an issue from different perspectives to obtain a more comprehensive understanding of the issue. And here I have an example of my marketing course where students can find and see themselves that even, you know, big brand names or expert in marketing can harm themselves and the brands that they are managing if they don't consider multiple perspectives when they create, you know, advertisements. So multiple perspectives in global cultures, different languages, cultural and social norms, and varied perspectives that are accepted among nations. And one example of that is this Course beer advertisement. So when Course went to Spanish market, the motto that they have that is widely accepted here and everyone loved that motto is "turn it loose." They translated, but the translation literally means "get diarrhea," which is a very bad translation. They didn't put in multiple perspectives, so it was a huge negative feedback when they had that Spanish phrase in the market of Spain. Or another example, big company like KFC, their motto is finger licking good. But when they went to Chinese market, what they translated was "eat your fingers off," which was very scary and disgusting for customers, and they didn't love it. And they were not successful at all before they pull it out of the market. So we really understand that understanding multiple perspectives are vital, no matter what discipline you're in. Another strategy to practice critical thinking is to practice balanced thinking. We should help our students to carefully consider arguments for and against a particular situations, because this helps our students remain more neutral and unbiased when they look at an issue. And we have an example of that in marketing. So to most people who are new or not very much familiar with the field of marketing, they consider marketing as an extension of deception. And in very, very rare cases like this terrible, terrible ad, I would agree that this is deception. This is not good marketing. But what about this advertisement that tries to, save our planet, save our oceans, but not using plastic bags? So we learn that, advertising per se is not good or bad. It depends how you use it. So you have to find evidence for and against a particular situation to think balancedly about an issue. Another strategy to practice critical thinking is the concept of 6 hats, which is from Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats book. And this concept simply says that, okay, imagine that you have one colored hat on. When you have that hat on, you only need to focus deeply on that aspect and don't think about any other aspect. So when you have your green hat on, you have to be as creative as you can. Bring on any ideas, any possibilities, any alternatives you have. This is really good in brainstorm sessions. When you have your facts hat, your white hat on, you only talk about facts, about the things that you have evidence, about the things that you can prove are true or are not true, or numbers or statistics. Black hats are difficulties or the problems that you see an issue. And red hat is the hat of feelings. So when you have your red hat on, you are free to express your feelings without being worried that you have no reason. This could be also sometimes helpful when you see, when you are looking at an issue from different and multiple perspectives. And also blue hat is a kind of like the big picture process looking hat, when you see all the pieces of the system together. So I use this in my discussion forums and ask my students to look at different marketing strategies with these hats on, so that they can understand what should bring forward, what should deliver when they have that role and that hat on. Another good strategy is to playing devil's advocate, or ask your students to role play. When we do that, we can ask our students to ask incisive questions, to see and look at the scenarios from other people's perspective, put themselves in the shoes of them and see how they see the problem, pose alternative explanations to the problem, and finally pinpoint and identify hidden assumptions, which are very important when we are talking about an issue that is controversial. And an example of that is in the consumer behavior course, when we're trying to understand marketing and advertising to children. So I ask my students, okay, put yourself in the shoes of parents. From a parent's perspective, how do you see marketing to children? How about from an ethical marketer, some marketer who really has limited itself to good marketing practice? Why they need to market to children? What about the children's perspective? What about the educator's perspective? This is very helpful when you look at, when you do this role playing and look at one issue from different perspectives. And last but not least, when you have a complex issue at hand, it won't help if you oversimplify the issue to your students. The solution is that you start with a simple idea and ask questions about contrasting views, ask questions about how they can define and understand that simple idea. And once you had this understanding that your students know this simple idea, then it's time to add another layer of complexity. And a good example of that is when we are talking about green marketing and greenwashing, which is pretending to be a green marketer, but you're not. And this is a complex issue for class. But by breaking it into very simple ideas, by defining the topics, the concepts, then step by step adding layers, the complexity will add, but it becomes very straightforward for students to understand. And then they can discuss it easier and better to the classroom, and they can discuss their ideas in a more civil way. Okay, I hand it over to Dr. Lozana.
Thank you. In closing, there's something I just want to say. What an amazing presentation. I just can't tell you how much I have enjoyed it. I actually just came in at the last minute. I want to thank my colleagues for letting me kind of share my story. It started out because I was part of Turn the Tide, and I shared a story with Newt, and then Newt called Teresa, and then here I am telling this little story that she thought would just kind of be a nice wrap up. But I think it's not even really necessary, because I in regards to how well everyone has done, but I did want to kind of share the story, and that's what I'm here to do. So thank you guys for letting me be here. About 2 months ago, and I've been teaching at Ashford for over 7.5 years. And prior to that, I taught for about 8, a little bit more than that, actually. I've been adjunct for as long as I can remember, at least since 7th grade. That's what I remember. But what I recall from this particular incident is that it was the first time in my experience that I had ever been spoken to and yelled at by a student as much as this incident when it occurred. And so, of course, it's right in the middle of COVID, and she's going through COVID, and we're all going through COVID. We're all during the pandemic. But in this particular classroom, she got upset with me because I asked her to cite her work. That's all I did. I said, I did what Yolanda said. Great job on the discussion. My only recommendation is that you work to on your citations and your reference. And I gave her some examples. I did what I always do. She was not happy with that. So she sent me a scathing email, and I said, maybe this would be good if we took it off on, we spoke so that I could explain to you. She was telling me that this had never, how the students say, this has never happened to me before. How could this happen? What's going on? And then accused me just on email of being prejudiced. Not knowing me, not having spoken to me, and not having any sign that had even occurred. So what I did is I finally got her on the phone, and we spoke, and she yelled at me, like I was mentioning, for quite a long time. And she was not cursing. She wasn't disrespectful, particularly to me or my person, but she had a lot to get off her chest. And I could feel myself wanting to stop her and tell her to stop and listen to me. And all I wanted to do was tell her about citations. That's all I wanted to do. But I recognized that there was a lot more to this story. And what I said to her when she finished, and I let her finish, and it went on for a while, is I said to her, I hear you and I see you. Because she said to me, do you have anything to say to me? Do you have anything to make, I can't remember exactly what she said, but do you have anything to make this right? What do you have to say for yourself is what she said for me. So I said, I hear you and I see you. And I recognized at that moment that she was not angry at me. She was angry and upset or frustrated, agitated, depressed, whatever any adjective you choose to use, at what was going on in her life and her experiences. Now, maybe that's part of my mental health background that I picked up on some of that, but I recognized that she wasn't upset with me. Now, I wish I could say that every one of my stories with students ended up that I did that well. I never heard back from her again, except that she continued to do her work and started to do a little bit better. I never had any more problems with her in the class. She never, as a matter of fact, at the end of the class, she said, thank you for everything that you did for me in the class. But I think my points are all reflected on some of the points that were made today. And that was, number one, I took a step back. Number two, I had to be able to kind of put on a different hat, if you will, to be able to manage what she had said and what she had done. But it's difficult sometimes to take that experience and not feel somewhat, for lack of better terms, verbally assaulted or verbally abused. But that wasn't really what the issue was at that particular moment. And I think for both of us, the situation would have been escalated. So I can't thank this group enough for what they've shared. And I agree with some of the chat saying we need to have this training annually. I think my colleagues should think about doing that in their free time. But it was well done, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And thank you. Thank you.
Well, I cannot thank our presenters enough, for sharing their experiences and insights today. I came in very confident that today would be insightful and very, useful for everybody that attended. But I was honestly a little blown away by just the amount of information that was shared and the amount of, expertise that was shared. So thank you again so much. A lot of times we would do like a Q&A, but I feel like the chat was also so lively that it was a whole nother, it took on a life of its own at one point, although it was, very obviously very close to that with the conversation, but I don't know that we have necessarily outstanding questions or answers unless one of the panelists would like to, address something that they saw, as a little bit more closing, but otherwise, Dr. Lozano, I thought you closed it out very well. Any additional thoughts from our panel?
I'm just going to unmute myself for one moment to say thank you, everybody, for all the work you put into this. And also to say that we all know it's not easy to be in difficult positions like this with students. It's not easy to not take certain words or certain situations personally, but know that you have a very wide support system in the CEDL and with your faculty colleagues, and communicate with us. We love to brainstorm together about how we can help you and help our students. And this project is a perfect example of the fruits of that labor. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Absolutely. I couldn't said it better myself. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us and for our panel for sharing today.